Your brain is not as protected as you think. For decades, neuroscientists believed the blood-brain barrier, that tightly regulated filter between your bloodstream and central nervous system, was a nearly impenetrable fortress. But as it turns out, we've underestimated just how easily modern environmental toxins can breach the gates. Among the most dangerous infiltrators? Airborne particulate matter. Tiny, invisible specks floating in the air, emitted from vehicles, factories, wildfires, and even brake pads that are now recognized as direct threats to brain health. Fine particulate matter, or PM 2.5, particles with a diameter of 2.5 microns or smaller, and especially ultrafine particles, PM 0.1, are so minuscule they bypass the usual defenses of the lungs and make their way into the bloodstream. From there, they take a direct route to the brain, not by brute force, but by stealth. These particles, once circulating, can reach the blood-brain barrier and either weaken it or slip through via transcytosis, a kind of molecular hijacking process that allows them to cross into the brain parenchyma. And what happens once they get inside? The consequences are far from subtle. Once inside the brain, these particles activate the brain's immune sentinels, microglia. Under normal conditions, microglia are essential for clearing debris, fighting infections, and pruning neurons during development. But when exposed chronically to pollution, they shift into a hyperactive, pro-inflammatory state. Imagine a security guard pulling the fire alarm every hour for decades, even when there's no fire. The brain is flooded with cytokines like interleukin-6, IL-6, tumor necrosis factor alpha, TNF-A, and other inflammatory mediators. This persistent low-grade inflammation, called neuroinflammation, doesn't just damage cells, it alters the very functioning of brain networks. One major victim of this internal blaze is the hippocampus, the brain's memory and learning center. Repeated inflammatory insults can impair neurogenesis, the birth of new neurons, and disrupt synaptic communication, the electrochemical whispering between brain cells that underpins all thought. Over time, these disruptions accumulate into something more permanent and sinister: structural brain changes, white matter lesions, and a progressive loss of cognitive reserve. It gets worse. Chronic neuroinflammation caused by particulate exposure is now implicated in the pathogenesis of Alzheimer's disease. Studies show that these pollutants promote the buildup of beta-amyloid plaques, one of the defining hallmarks of Alzheimer's. Inflammatory signals stimulate enzymes like BACE1 and gamma secretase, which produce amyloid beta from its precursor protein. At the same time, microglial dysfunction caused by pollutant exposure means the brain becomes less able to clear these plaques once they form. The result? A slow but relentless accumulation of toxic proteins, driven not just by age or genetics, but by what you've been breathing every day. Even tau pathology, the formation of tangled proteins inside neurons, appears to be influenced by environmental exposure. In animal models, exposure to diesel exhaust has led to increased phosphorylation of tau proteins, further accelerating neurodegeneration. It's like throwing gasoline on a fire that would have taken decades to burn. Suddenly, the timeline shortens and cognitive symptoms may appear earlier and progress faster. This isn't just theory. Autopsy studies on people living in polluted urban environments, including children and young adults, have found early signs of neuroinflammation, microglial activation, and even preclinical Alzheimer's markers in their brains. That's right. In people decades away from what we typically consider old age, pollution is already setting the stage for cognitive decline. And don't be fooled by the idea that these effects are limited to people with pre-existing vulnerabilities. While certain genetic factors, like carrying the APO for allele, may increase susceptibility, chronic exposure to air pollution has been shown to affect people across all demographics. In fact, some studies suggest pollution acts as a trigger in those who are genetically predisposed, flipping switches that otherwise might have stayed off for years, or perhaps forever. The tragedy here is that this isn't just about brain fog or slightly slower memory recall. This is about turning the brain into a long-term inflammatory war zone, where the immune system's overreaction causes the very damage it was meant to prevent. Over time, that inflammation becomes a defining feature of how the brain ages, not gracefully but aggressively. So, what's the takeaway? Air pollution doesn't just damage lungs, hearts, or skin. It gets inside your brain, sparks a chemical riot, and stays there long after the pollution levels drop. Chronic exposure to airborne particulates may very well be one of the most insidious accelerants of cognitive decline in modern society, not because the effects are immediate, but because they build in silence, neuron by neuron, day after day, breath by breath. If Alzheimer's disease is a fire, then airborne pollutants are the invisible accelerant no one's bothering to extinguish. And by the time we realize what we've ignited, it might be too late to put it out.